Hi, I'm Michelle, and today we're going to be exploring how literature circles can promote higher levels of critical thinking and reflection in our Stage 6 English students. The article that I based this podcast from is called Slow Down, You Move Too Fast, Literature Circles as Reflective Practice, and it is from the Journal of Education, Strategies, Issues and Ideas. As students enter into the HSC years, they are required to complete some form of English as a subject. In all of these different levels of English, they are required to somewhat critically analyse texts. In order to become an effective literacy learner, it is important to slow down and reflect on reading and writing. This is where literature circles come into play. They are an effective way to allow students to critically analyse and reflect on all types of texts. They can look at other people's critical perspectives and engage in meaning making from their own judgments as well as other people's. Why is this also important? Well, it's in the syllabus. In the HSC outcomes, it requires students to demonstrate understanding of how relationships between composer, responder, text, and context shape meaning. It also requires students to describe and analyse the ways that language forms and features and structures of text shape meaning and influence responses. But most specifically to this topic, one of the HSC outcomes requires students to engage with the details of text, to respond critically and personally. And lastly, students are required to reflect on their own processes of learning. Despite the differences between, say, standard and advanced English, analysing text is an important element of the prelim and the HSC course. And this critical analysis will help the students to be able to write critically in their actual HSC exam because they've had experience in this area. Practice makes perfect, right? And it'll significantly help the students in their essay writing too. So, we are all living in a really fast-paced world. There are video games, texts, emails, DVDs, cartoons, movies with special effects, and sports that are zooming past us at high speeds. With this kind of culture encircling our Stage 6 students, it's no wonder that some of them have trouble picking and poking their way through text to find the purposes and the meaning. They don't have the time to critically analyse and reflect on the assigned text in front of them, let alone any related text that they have to find for themselves. So how are they going to reflect on their texts? How are they going to gather critical perspectives on articles and books and films? The article suggests that they can do this through reflective learning. According to Boyd and Fales, reflective learning is the process of internally examining and exploring an issue of concern triggered by an experience which creates and clarifies meaning in terms of self and which results in a changed conceptual perspective. Dewey, a researcher that looked at scrapbooks as a means of reflection, comments that reflection is a progression that requires meaning-making and continuity of learning, systematic and rigorous thinking with a foundation in scientific inquiry, interaction with others, and attitude that value intellectual and personal growth not only of oneself but also of others. So putting these two together, reflective learning requires hard work, thinking deeply and analytically about experiences, and verifying personal responses as connected with the previous mentioned. So this is the big picture and can be really beneficial for our Stage 6 students. So using literature circles can help students to achieve this high level of critical thinking. Literature circles can be the method to nurturing personal and critical responses to text. Both critical and personal responses complement each other as they foster community and support a sophisticated high level of thinking. There's also a sense of social justice for the learners because they can have the opportunity to speak up and be engaged in activities that are so beneficial to their own learning. It is indeed a different method of critically analysing text. And to increase the quality of discussion that occurs in these literature circles, teachers can initially prompt the students with questions and then let the students go and do their own thing in their own groups. The teacher can then go around and monitor and support if needed and look at the quality of the literature-based discussions. And the text can be chosen to study. They can include, but are definitely not limited to, novels, short stories, poems, articles, essays, non-fiction books, and also online sources. So in a study done, that was found in the article, on literature circles conducted by Joseph Sanacor, there were some positives and negatives of them. Some groups were productive, which owed to other members being attentive to what was being said, and they also constructed meaning out of the literature. Other groups were not so productive and wasted time. Some were bullied into their point of view and focused on the tangents rather than the main points, and others held on to their preconceived ideas of meaning instead of considering other people's perspectives that had been generated by reading the same text. So, one way to implement literature circles could be on the internet, in a virtual literature circle. However, this could be a little bit tricky to manage in a classroom setting. Nevertheless, the students can reflect in different ways. They can look at text to self, text to text, and text to world. And these could be the 3 different strands that the literature circles would be based from, and each student could see what other students had posted as well as add insightful comments to the discussions. Another study that was done on Year 10 students who completed literature circles on social, cultural and political perspectives came up with some interesting results. The students most commonly discussed the social class, including ideas such as attitudes, consumption practices, occupations and income, probably due to the relevance that it had to the class itself. However, the students did not consider the critical perspectives on social class that the novel that they were actually studying had in it. This is a potential problem for students who are involved in literature circles, that they will only consider a topic that is relevant to them and skim the surface rather than to dive deep to the critical analysis that's actually desired. This is not just an issue in literature circle sense, but also with other texts. Siegel states that if students do not consider the way that modes are historically and culturally produced, they may simply reproduce designs that reflect and reinforce the status quo. Therefore, it is more effective when reflection is considered to be a vital part of the literature circle. Teachers have the opportunity to stretch students' thinking from personal responses to critical responses. This demonstrates growth in the students' level of higher thinking. According to the article, the best way to engage students is to hook them in personal ways. Students are really most likely to engage in a text if their personal responses are respected. So teachers can do this by supporting open-ended questions with the intent that the student will emulate these questions in regards to the text. Creating the base for discussion is not only important in the classroom scene, it is important to help other students outside of school. And these discussions have the potential for using the situational context of a book to develop students' social imagination, which in turn can influence their regulation, their social relationships, and moral development. Some questions that support this movement would be, if I was the main character, how would I have approached the problem? What would I have learned about myself from my approach to the problem? Number 3, what difficulties would I have encountered as I attempted to solve the problem? Number 4, what would I have learned about myself from the ways in which I handled these difficulties? And lastly, what would I have dealt with the problem successfully and why? Students that were asked these types of questions about a novel, it's actually Hatchet, said that it helped them to personally connect with the novel and help them to live through the character and his experiences. According to the article, when students' personal responses are encouraged, respected, and sensitively refined with teacher support, the stage is set for moving to deeper reflections that consider critical responses to text. Possible student roles that could happen in the literature circles give English teachers a base to start their literature discussions from. These roles are, number 1, the problem poser. This is the person that identifies and presents major issues that are in the text. Number 2 is the perspective taker. This is the person that adopts a point of view of a character who's involved in problematic actions. Number 3 is the difference locator, and this is the person who recognises the differences of the characters whilst recognising how they are developing. The stereotype tracker is number 4. This is the person who identifies and critiques dominant stereotypes. And lastly, there's the lens wearer, who is a person who considers the readings from the perspective of a pertinent critical literary theory, such as feminism. In these types of discussions, the teacher may need to provide more, not less guidance, scaffolding and modelling. The teacher should ask questions that support elaboration, seek clarification, request details from the text, provide alternative perspectives and motivate students to grow beyond their status quo language. When we ask students to just slow down a bit and reflect through literature, we as teachers help them to develop higher level thinking processes. They can go beyond narrow-minded perspectives on meaning and consider a broader range of perspectives, especially on multicultural and political texts. we are asking students to invest actively in their own learning and to embrace language as a motivational tool to discussing literature. Literature circles can therefore increase self-discipline, develop higher levels of thinking, and ultimately have greater success across the entire curriculum.